Anastasia is a popular 1997 children's animated musical movie that's basically an alternate history retelling of the story of Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova of Russia, in which she survives the murder of her family, gets a gnarly traumatic brain injury that gives her retrograde amnesia, fights her mom's favorite undead spiritual leader, and falls in love with a cringe pickup artist who's attempting to scam her grandmother. It's also got a weird bat with the weirdest accent I've ever heard. I don't know what that accent is, but that's not what we Slavs sound like, let me tell you.
Sir, what happened to the party idea?
Though Anastasia is obviously an alternate history retelling and not meant to be totally historically accurate, there's some really nonsensical historical inaccuracies in it that I just gotta talk smack about, especially as a Russian. Like in Anastasia, the dates of real events that actually happened in real life are wrong. Pretty much every real life event that actually happened is portrayed wrong. There's a whole bunch of made up stuff, and there's a lot of things in it that make me convinced that they didn't consult any actual Russians or any real historical sources while creating this movie. And if you like Anastasia, that's fine. It's entertaining and cute, and you're allowed to have autonomy over what you like. I'm personally gonna roast it, but that's just me, you know? So let's jump into it, shall we? Here's everything historically wrong with Anastasia. 1. The prologue already makes no sense. The prologue starts in 1916, the year right before the February and October revolutions, with Anastasia's grandma, the Grand Duchess Maria Feodorovna, saying, "There was a time not very long ago when we lived in an enchanted world of elegant palaces and grand parties. The year was 1916, and my son Nicholas was the Tsar of Imperial Russia." And right off the bat, there's multiple historical inaccuracies just within this one scene. They're having that ball in the Catherine Palace, the Tsar's family's summer residence. But it's winter, as the snow falling to the ground suggests, so you'd think they'd be having it in the Winter Palace, which is a real palace that this ball likely would have taken place in if it ever happened. Except the last Romanov Grand Ball ever in Imperial Russia actually happened in February 1903 in the Winter Palace, which is the palace that they did stuff in the winter, which it is in the beginning of the movie, and which was 13 years before 1916. There was just not a lot of time for balls for the royal family after that point, given that this 1903 grand ball in the Winter Palace was followed by the Russo Japanese War from 1904 to 1905, Bloody Sunday in 1905, where Nicholas II had peaceful protesters brutally slaughtered by the Imperial Guard, which led to the Russian Revolution of 1905 and the creation of the State Duma, Russia entering World War I in July 1914, and a lot of political turmoil because people were not happy with the Tsar doing all these things. I can't imagine why. The last ball hosted by Russian nobility in general, not even the Romanovs, was also in 1913, 3 years before 1916, when the prologue takes place, and 1 year before Russia's entry into World War I. It was hosted to mark the 300th anniversary of Romanov reign in the Assembly Hall of the Nobility, in part because the Romanovs couldn't be putting on grand balls in the Winter Palace at that point without making a whole lot of people really, really mad at them for the grandiose displays of opulence while normal people were having a terrible time. Especially during World War One, which is honestly the energy we should have for all these celebrity events that keep being put on while are being slaughtered en masse by the US backed occupation, and while the Congo and Sudan are experiencing their own. It's the fuck's a Met Gala? Never heard of it. But anyway, in the movie, there's a ball in 1916, and Rasputin shows up and puts a terrible curse on the Romanov family that leads to their eventual murder by the brutal Bolsheviks because, the Romanovs didn't do anything to make the working class mad on their own. It was obviously just a curse. Bloody Sunday? What's that? Let's just never mention that. People were not upset for any reason, okay? It was just the curse, okay? Rasputin obviously never cursed the Romanov family. In real life, Rasputin was quite close with the Romanovs, especially Alexandra. Whereas in the movie, the main rationale for his betrayal of the royal family is that Nicholas II banished him as a traitor at some point, which didn't actually happen. But Rasputin wants to murder them for that because we need a plot in which the Romanovs are absolved of all the crimes they committed against the working class. How many historical inaccuracies is that in just the prologue alone? 7? We're off to a great start already. Also, right off the bat, the framing in this prologue is supposed to make us empathize with the royal family of Russia and make us feel so bad that their wonderful life, full of elegant palaces and grand parties, things that everyone wants, was ruined by the evil revolution. which, as we know from the movie, happened entirely because Rasputin put a curse on the royal family and had nothing to do with anything else at all. But in reality, there was a lot of political unrest for a long time prior to the October Revolution. The Russian Empire had barely crawled out of feudalism at that point, as serfdom had only been abolished in 1861, 40 years before the birth of Anastasia herself. In real life, not in the movie. The movie timeline is whack. Put a pin in that. So, because of this, right before the October Revolution, the peasantry comprised about 85% of the population of the Russian Empire. The majority of these peasants lived in extreme poverty, so they didn't get to go to any of the fancy balls. Maybe if they were working in the kitchen, like Dmitri, who, by the way, is told in the prologue, you belong in the kitchen, which I guess means that child labor is fine if you're working for the Russian royal family. But the Russian Empire was not really that fun or happening for most people, except the monarchy, nobility, and landowners, which was a tiny minority of the population. Yes, there was beautiful culture and art and important scientific discoveries that came out of the Russian Empire, but engaging in those things was not really accessible to most people due to the rampant inequality. The life expectancy in the Russian Empire at the time was around 30 because poor access to healthcare and poor sanitation meant that a lot of people of infectious diseases. About 70 to 80% of the population was illiterate. Working class people were generally quite disillusioned with the Tsardom because of the poor working conditions, poor quality of life, government corruption, frequent famines, and so on. Agricultural working peasants worked up to 16-hour days tilling the land, while landowners who typically lived in cities earned profits from these workers who paid the landowners an annual tribute for their partial freedom. If you were lucky enough to avoid being a peasant, then you were likely part of the proletariat and lived in a city. But the population of major cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow nearly doubled between 1890 and 1910. This population increase led to major overcrowding and poor living conditions for workers, who typically worked 11.5-hour days, 6 days a week, with inadequate wages and poor working conditions, constantly risking injury and even death. Also, 11 hours a day, 6 days a week is 69 hours. Nice. Except not, that's way too many hours to work in a week. Many educated Russians noted that the monarchical rule of the Tsars was hampering Russia's development, especially compared to Western European countries that were much more advanced at the time and where people didn't die of infectious diseases at nearly the same rate. I don't think any of this was aspirational or something that really needed to be preserved, but when watching this movie, we're supposed to completely ignore the fact that life was awful for the working class people of the Russian Empire, who comprised the majority of the population. This movie just wants us to ignore all of that and just think, oh, so sad for the royal family, and that's it. Aside from the historical inaccuracies, my least favorite thing about Anastasia is that it literally indoctrinates you into siding with rich royalty that you likely have nothing in common with against a working class movement while completely ignoring your average everyday person who had a horrible time under the Romanovs. It also effectively attempts to absolve the Romanovs of all the crimes they committed against their own populace by not mentioning any of that at all and attributing the October Revolution, the only revolution that's mentioned, to Rasputin's curse. When, like, maybe the fact that people had such poor quality of life propagated some sentiments in them, like, maybe it'd be better if this Tsar guy wasn't in charge and if we didn't have an autocratic government where one guy can make all the decisions about our lives but doesn't do anything to help us. Maybe the workers should have more of a say in how things are run. Maybe the monarchy is limiting Russia's progress and wasting human potential. Maybe we need better working conditions and better sanitation and healthcare and education. Maybe the life expectancy and literacy rate could be way higher. Or maybe it was just Rasputin's curse. You ever think about that? No, you didn't, because you only think about yourself. I'm just kidding. I don't know what you think about, but hopefully not Rasputin's curse. That never happened. 2. The Russian Revolution. In order to explain the historical inaccuracies in the rest of the movie, we have to front load a lot of Russian history. You're gonna know a lot about the Russian revolutions by the time this video's over. This is a history video, so I assume you expected this. The February Revolution of 1917, which is never mentioned in this movie in any capacity despite its significance, was started by striking women textile workers demanding peace, land, and bread, which led to a massive general strike across Petrograd. This ultimately led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, the dissolution of the Russian Empire and its monarchy, the exiling of Nicholas II and his family to Tobolsk in Siberia, and the creation of a liberal provisional government. At the same time, however, Petrograd workers elected delegates to form the Petrograd Soviet. There was a power vacuum left after the Tsar's abdication, and the working people wanted a worker run government, so they just made their own. These seem pretty significant to leave out of the movie. Also, the reason these workers were demanding peace was specifically because the Russian Empire was involved in World War I at the time, as previously mentioned, which is also never mentioned in the movie, despite the fact that it's happening during the entire prologue, which also seems quite significant. Why are you partying during a world war? Why are people not mutinying? I mean, I guess they're about to, but it's really the curse. Also, regular working class people really did not like that Russia was involved in World War I, and they probably really didn't like the scorched earth policy used by the Imperial Russian Army and the fact that working people's lands and crops were destroyed and people were forcefully displaced by the government because of this war. And Tsar Nicholas II had left Petrograd to command the army, so as you can guess, people were not pleased with him at all. And he also really sucked at war, so that didn't help. Several months later, the October Revolution deposed the provisional government and established the Second Congress of Soviets as the supreme governing body of the former Russian Empire. The allies of the Russian Empire didn't like this, so this was followed by a brutal civil war until 1923, in which the Bolsheviks fought against multiple separatist movements, as well as the White Army and its allies, which included the allies of World War I. Also, in March 1918, Soviet Russia withdrew from World War I with the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Also, there was a famine from 1921 to 1923 because apparently civil wars are not great for food production. But the Bolsheviks ultimately won the civil war and established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That's a lot of historical background. So, how does this all relate to the movie, you may ask? So, first off, timeline wise, this movie is totally whack. The real Anastasia was born in 1901, but in the movie they age her down by 7 years, so instead of being 15 in 1916 in the prologue, as she would have been in real life, she's 8. Which means that in the movie, she was born in 1908, not 1901. So she's 9 when the revolution occurs in the movie, even though she was actually 16. After the prologue, it's 1926, so she's 18 for the rest of the movie, even though she would have actually been 25 in real life at the time. Why did they age her down? I suspect it's because they were really committed to making her 18, and if she were 18 in 1919, there would have been a whole multi party, multi front civil war going on, and the writers probably didn't want to deal with that. And why were they so committed to making her 18? You might guess that it's because it's unbecoming of a duchess to be unwed at the old age of 25, but also the life expectancy in Russia at the time was 30, so a 25-year-old would have been beyond middle aged. An old hag, really. Did the writers actually have this in mind, or did the writers just think that children don't find 25-year-olds relatable? Who can say? Also, I guess it doesn't make sense for a 25-year-old to be leaving an orphanage. Whatever. We're not there yet. Anyway, in the second part of the prologue, the Russian Revolution happens because of Rasputin's curse. A bunch of guys with torches and pitchforks, who I guess are supposed to be the Bolsheviks, storm the Catherine Palace, which again is the Summer Palace. They actually stormed the Winter Palace because it was near winter. It was actually November by our calendar, but by the Julian calendar, which they used, it was October, so it's the October Revolution, but really it was in November. But anyway, there's a ton of historical inaccuracies just in this scene alone. The Romanovs are in Petrograd for some reason, even though they were actually exiled to Tobolsk already. The entire Romanov family is slaughtered on sight except Anastasia and her grandma, which didn't happen either. Marie Feodorovna is also in Petrograd for some reason, even though she had moved to Crimea at that point. The Bolsheviks are working for Rasputin, who is leading them, and the revolution is incredibly bloody and brutal. The Romanovs weren't actually executed by Bolsheviks storming their palace and literally shooting them on sight, like in the movie, and Rasputin definitely wasn't involved in this at all. Nicholas II's family was already exiled to Tobolsk at that point, as we established. Then, in April 1918, they were taken to the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg, or Yekaterinburg, and executed in July 1918 under very suspicious circumstances. No one really knows who gave the order, just that the Ural Regional Soviet approved it. And there's no documentation showing that Vladimir Lenin or Yakov Sverdlov, who are commonly claimed to have given the order, actually ordered the executions. There is, however, documentation showing that the Russian Central Committee of the Soviets ordered a public trial for Nicholas II in Moscow, but with the understanding that if time ran out, the local Soviet could take whatever steps it considered appropriate at their own discretion, which is obviously what ended up happening. I imagine it's hard to make decisions in the midst of a brutal civil war where you're also fighting against the allies of the guy you have in custody, and the guy you have in custody has historically done the working class that you are a part of dirty. Yeah. Also, it is pretty wild that the Bolsheviks kept really, really meticulous documentation of most things, but just not this. Also, while the October Revolution is portrayed as being so brutal and violent, the actual coup d'etat was nearly bloodless. It was just the stuff that came after that was not, specifically the Russian Civil War, but even the actions leading up to the revolution were mostly nonviolent. The methods that drove events in Russia during 1917 were overwhelmingly nonviolent. Masses of ordinary people went on strike, demonstrated in the streets, refused to cooperate with officials, and organized to change economic and social relationships by simply acting as if those changes already existed. Russians created a web of new political institutions and channeled political conflict into them through impassioned speeches, competing motions, credential challenges, walkouts, formal resolutions, and delegate elections. One contemporary referred to the revolution as one seemingly endless political meeting. Perhaps most important was security force defection. At key moments when troops were ordered to use violence by the Tsar in February, by frontline commanders in June, by General Kornilov in August, or by provisional government in October, they simply refused, dissolving the power those giving the orders assumed they had. Given this overwhelming preponderance of nonviolent methods, it is clear that the Russian Revolution actually owes its success to nonviolence instead of violence. During the revolution itself, while there were some clashes and a handful of deaths, what followed was primarily 2 days of non shooting confrontations that culminated in a curiously unmilitary face off at the Winter Palace. As troops nominally guarding the provisional government turned over their weapons and melted away, its leaders fled the city or were arrested without incident, leaving the Petrograd Soviet and its Bolshevik leaders with effective governing power. And that's from David Carroll Cotran from Why the Russian Revolution Actually Owes Its Success to Nonviolent Resistance from Waging Nonviolence. 3. The Tale of Zombie Rasputin. So during this brutal revolution that is taking place in the Summer Palace for some reason, Dmitri the kitchen boy bravely helps Anastasia and her grandma escape the palace via a secret passageway that doesn't actually exist. As Anastasia and her grandmother Marie attempt to escape from the palace gardens, Rasputin tries to slay Anastasia, but the ice underneath him breaks and he supposedly drowns. But he actually becomes a zombie after, which is weirdly the most historically accurate thing in this movie. In 1916, a few Russian nobles, led by Vladimir Purishkevich, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and Prince Felix Yusupov, collectively decided that Rasputin had way too much influence over Tsarina Alexandra, so they invited him to Prince Yusupov's home, the Moika Palace, to assassinate him. According to Yusupov's account of the assassination, Yusupov gave Rasputin cakes, tea, and wine laced with cyanide, which somehow did nothing, so he shot him in the chest, which knocked him out for a little bit, but then he woke up and attempted to escape. So the nobles shot him again and beat him up, then threw his passed out body in the Dnieper River. When his body was found a few days later, there was reported to be water in his lungs, which means that it wasn't the cyanide or the shooting or the beating him up that got him, it was the drowning. That's kind of wild, honestly. So, Zombie Rasputin honestly makes a lot of sense. A lot more sense than most of the rest of the movie. But he was no longer alive as of December 1916 and like never actually lived long in zombie form, so he physically could not have stormed the Winter Palace, or sorry, the Catherine Palace, with the Bolsheviks like that. Although in the movie he's already a zombie who sold his soul for magical powers, so whatever, I guess. Anastasia's grandma successfully escapes on a train, but Anastasia can't hold on to her hand as the train is leaving and falls, hits her head, and is lucky enough that her particular traumatic brain injury only gives her retrograde amnesia, the inability to remember her past, basically, which is also a very convenient plot point. Also, as far as I know, Anastasia was not known to have experienced any TBIs. Oh, okay, so we just got past the prologue, which is probably the worst in terms of historical inaccuracy, so the rest of this should be way faster, and you will hopefully know a lot more about Russian history now. 4. St. Petersburg? Then, 10 years after all that brutality and bloodshed that we now know never actually happened like that, we see St. Petersburg, where people are singing about how there's a rumor in St. Petersburg that Anastasia is still alive and how it's the only thing keeping everyone going because the revolution has made everyone's lives so bleak. I mean, this obviously didn't happen, so it feels cheap to count it as a historical inaccuracy, but like, whatever. And there were like Anastasia imposters at the time, like Anna Anderson, who was like the most famous one, this Polish woman that was institutionalized after a suicide attempt. And then when she finally revealed her identity, she was like, I'm actually Anastasia. And no one, as far as I know, no one in the Soviet Union was like, that's the best thing ever. We're so happy. And I certainly don't think people sang in the streets about it. Also, at this point in time, there was no St. Petersburg, and there hadn't been a St. Petersburg for 12 whole years. You may have noticed that I've been referring to a city called Petrograd throughout this video. That was St. Petersburg. Once Russia entered World War I in 1914, they de Germanized St. Petersburg's name and turned it into Petrograd because they were fighting against the Germans and didn't want their capital to have a German name. Then in 1924, after Lenin's death, Petrograd was renamed to Leningrad in his honor. Also, this scene really shows us that the writers think that people hated the USSR and wanted nothing more than for the Grand Duchess Anastasia back, which is incredibly bizarre. These regular working class people are not shown at all up until this point, but now that we get a glimpse into the life of the working class, they're simping for the royal family that they, the working class, overthrew in the February Revolution and not the October Revolution, because they were already gone by that point. The Russian Empire was a backwards country with terrible working conditions, high levels of poverty, a low literacy rate, a low life expectancy, poor sanitation, poor healthcare, a poor education system, and so on, as we discussed earlier. So I highly doubt that these working class people who were finally able to access things like healthcare and education were out here being like, no, I want to go back to the time before we had access to education and healthcare. And when I say healthcare and sanitation were bad, I mean they were like so bad. The Russian Empire had the worst sanitary conditions in Europe. 1 million people were infected by a typhus epidemic from 1907 to 1917. In 1915, there were about 800,000 cases of epidemic diseases, including 43,000 cases of cholera and 178,000 cases of typhoid fever. Total mortality was 25 to 30 per 1,000 individuals, mainly due to infectious diseases. Of 6 million babies born annually, about 2 million died of diseases or malnutrition. Also, several days before the February Revolution, the one that ousted the royal family, the Central Board of Health technically ceased to exist. Things were really not that great in terms of healthcare outcomes in the Russian Empire. But for some reason, it feels like the writers were like, well, they probably didn't think this far ahead, but it feels like they were like, sure, the Bolsheviks had campaigns, like their liquidation of illiteracy campaign, which rapidly improved literacy rates among the population, bringing the literacy rate from about 20 to 30% in 1917 to about 51 in 1926 when the movie takes place, to 89.7 by 1939. Their campaign to introduce a robust universal healthcare system, which included building medical institutes, establishing the People's Healthcare Commissariat to oversee public health, providing free educations for medical professionals, and making healthcare available to way more people than ever before, which obviously improved all the aforementioned statistics that we just listed. Their campaign for women's equality that led to them establishing gender equality as a constitutional right, becoming the first country to legalize abortion on request, making no fault divorce a thing, building a widespread network of kindergartens and nurseries in both the cities and the countryside to ease the burden of childcare, and many other impressive things. But no, these people want to go back to the time before all that. There's no way. Like maybe former landowners and nobility and white army supporters who likely had access to all that stuff before. Yeah, like sure, maybe them, but there's no way this massive group of singing and dancing people is all former nobility, landowners, and white army supporters. Or maybe they are, and that's the only way that scene makes sense. Except why are they calling it St. Petersburg? That doesn't make any sense. It's just very bizarre to me that there's a massive group of people singing about how everything is worse now that the Russian Empire is no more, and how Anastasia's potentially being alive is the only thing keeping them going. There's no way. And just because I have to say this, because people view the truth or anything positive about a place they don't like as apologism of everything bad they did, yes, there were obviously problems with the Soviet Union from its inception, as there are problems with any system. Because systems are created by humans and humans are fallible, so the systems they create are fallible and can always be critiqued and improved upon. But the USSR also made a lot of major improvements to people's lives really, really quickly that are just completely erased in this and in like the Western education system in general. But like, I think we can objectively say that going from having poor sanitation, no entity overseeing public health, a high infant mortality rate, and an abundance of infectious diseases, to reducing the number of infectious disease deaths and the infant mortality rate, establishing a central governing body overseeing public health, training more medical professionals for free, and providing people with preventative health care is a good thing, right? Unless you're just so convinced that the USSR was just pure categorical evil and did nothing good ever, but that would be extremely silly. But if you do think that, part of that is because the powers that be really don't want us to know that if the working class is in power, a lot of changes for the better can be made really quickly. Demonizing the USSR and other socialist countries keeps us ignorant to that fact. Like, yes, there were bad things, and a lot of people were unfortunately traumatized by these bad things, my own family included, but that's why we look at the accomplishments for inspiration, at the mistakes, to not repeat them in the future. This should not be controversial whatsoever. Also, the USSR was the first ever socialist experiment, so of course they made some really bad decisions at times, as has any country in the history of the world. You learn through practice, and sometimes that involves mistakes and failures. This applies to running an entire country, too, which is why countries and any systems that impact people should be run democratically with ongoing transparent feedback from the people who utilize or live under said system, which was something the USSR kind of fucked up on at some points, not gonna lie. Like I said, they weren't perfect, but they did a lot of good, and if you can't acknowledge that, then I'm sorry, but you've been programmed. I can't snap, but wake up! 5. Anya's antics with Dmitri and Vladimir. Vladimir. Vlad. After the montage of people being weirdly happy about Anastasia being alive, Anastasia, who is now called Anya, which is the diminutive form of Anna. I don't know if they did that on purpose or not. The diminutive form of Anastasia is Nastya. But anyway, she finally leaves the horrid people's orphanage run by the angry Comrade Flemenkov, who tells Anya she'll never amount to anything except maybe being a fishmonger if she's lucky. Anya walks up to a fork in the road with one road leading to the fishing village and the other leading to St. Petersburg, which didn't exist, and asks for a sign. And then a cute little dog is like, hey, you should go to St. Petersburg. And it's so cute and so warm and fuzzy and so heartwarming. And then she gives her dog the worst name. I know they didn't consult any Russians on this movie because they would have immediately been like, why are you naming a dog that? That's not cute. Not only is Puka not pronounced cutely in Russian like that, our vowels are very flat, so it would just be Puka, Puka. But also, Puk means fart, Pukat means to fart, Puka is basically fart. Anastasia has named her sweet little puppy Fart. I really can't take this movie seriously. Like, if you like it, that's fine. You do you. You're allowed to like what you like, but I simply cannot like this movie. Though it is extremely entertaining, and I definitely watch it again, but anyway. Anya now has a cute little dog friend named Fart. Then Anya arrives in St. Petersburg, has no clue what to do, tries to buy a train ticket to Paris because she still has the necklace from her grandma that says Together in Paris and she wants to know what that's all about. She gets denied because she doesn't have an exit visa and is told by an old lady to go see Dmitri in the old palace. But don't tell him I sent ya. Then we see Dmitri and Vladimir Vlad, I'm just gonna call him Vlad, attempting to recruit an Anastasia lookalike to scam Anya's grandmother so they can get a lot of money since she is offering a reward for her safe passage to meet her in Paris, where Maria Feodorovna never actually lived because she was Danish, so she moved to Denmark after the October Revolution. But I guess Copenhagen is not as romantic as Paris. In this scene, Dmitri and Vlad are just getting a whole bunch of no-talent scrubs at their audition. Oh no, how will we scam this old rich lady now? But luckily for them, Anya finds Dmitri and Vlad to ask them to take her to Paris. Dmitri is a suave con man who is also obviously a pickup artist, given that his approach towards interacting with Anya is to neg her. Oh, your name's Anya? That's not even a Russian name, bro. Like, shut the fuck up. I hate this guy. Anya? Anya? That doesn't even sound correct. Probably because it's not a Russian name, bro. Also, Maria Feodorovna never offered a reward for Anastasia's return. That's fully made up. Anyway, Dmitri and Vlad eventually agree to take Anya to Paris, after enough negging, to meet Maria Feodorovna, thinking that she's just a very convincing Anastasia lookalike. In the meantime, Bartok the Bat is chilling with Rasputin's reliquary, and zombie Rasputin magically appears out of nowhere and is like, I need to get rid of the last Romanov! She's alive! This is awful! Even though she was alive this entire time, but I guess like now she's about to meet her grandma. Like I don't know. He seems kind of late, and he doesn't like care about the grandma. Like okay, then Anya, Dmitri, and Vlad get on a train to Paris, which is the only time that the Soviet Union is even vaguely brought up. When Vlad is filling out a passport that says Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, and then the ticket checkers are going around, and Vlad is like, I hate this government because real Soviet passports have red text, not blue text like his fake passport. So the train ticket checkers are going to catch on to them if they don't skedaddle. And I do actually have a Soviet passport because the Russian Federation issued Soviet passports in the 90s, apparently, and it does indeed have red text. Also, Dmitri is so annoying on the train. He and Anya get into a fight at one point, and he's like, I don't like girls like you. Because he's a shitty pickup artist. I hate that guy. Why is he a love interest? Then Rasputin's magical green bat demon tries to slay Anya and her pals, but through their quick thinking, they manage to escape. But now there's no train, so they walk for a bit. I wonder what happened to the rest of the people on that train. I hope they're okay. Probably not, because that train fell off a bridge, but I guess we'll just never know what happened to them. Then there's a montage where Dmitri and Vlad teach Anya how to be a real noble like the real Anastasia. Then they get on a ship to go to France, and Rasputin attempts to kill Anya by making her sleepwalk this time. In her dream, Anya is about to jump into a lake with the rest of her family, but in her sleepwalking state, she's about to jump off the ship until Dmitri bravely saves her. What a good guy. Guess you could be an asshole to someone as long as you save them when they're in mortal danger, and then you're good. But anyway, Dmitri saves Anya as he should. And also, Anya's brother Alexei had hemophilia, so she probably should have woken up right away upon seeing him jump into a body of water from that high up. Because I assume you can't really do that if your blood doesn't clot well. Is that a historical inaccuracy? I mean, dreams are weird, so like, whatever. And then zombie Rasputin's obviously really upset about all this because his plans failed again. Also, during the learning how to be a noble montage, Dmitri gets Anya a nice dress, and then while they're on this ship, Anya wears this dress, and immediately upon seeing her in the nice dress, Dmitri goes from being like, I don't like girls like you to, oh god, that's a nice dress, and I suddenly can't talk now. They learn how to dance, it's all romantic and whatever. Actually, it's like way too horny for a kids movie, in my opinion. Like, why are they being so horny in front of Vlad? The straight agenda must be stopped. Let kids be kids without pushing straightness onto them. Ugh, disgusting. 6. Meeting Maria Feodorovna. Then we see Maria and Sophie. I don't know why I keep rolling the R on that. I feel like you can't say like Maria Feodorovna because then you're like switching languages halfway through. I guess I should just call her Marie because that's what they call her in the movie. Yeah, I don't know. Why am I being so formal with this lady? Anyway, then we see Marie and Sophie, Marie's cousin and assistant, meeting with an Anastasia imposter and kicking her out, which makes Marie so frustrated that she says she is done with this thing because of all these fakes continuously attempting to scam her. Also, Sophie was not a real person, but is apparently loosely based on Alexandra's lady-in-waiting, Baroness Sophie Buxhovedin, who was not actually Marie's cousin at all. Right after this, Team Anastasia finally gets to France, where they first have to meet with Sophie before meeting Maria Feodorovna. Marie. They show up to meet Sophie, and Vlad and Sophie are so into each other. I feel like the scene with Dmitri and Anya dancing was like way too horny, but this is like fine because they're adults and there's no weird animosity between the two. They clearly know what love is, and it's not nagging a girl until you see her look hot in a dress one time, and then you're like, oh god. Anyway, Vlad and Sophie greet each other by saying the other's full name, and it's slightly off. Russian names have a first name, a patronymic, which is your dad's first name plus Yevna or Ovna for girls, or Yevich or Ovich for boys, and a last name. Vlad's full name is Vladimir Vanya Vanitsky Vasilievich, so his last name is using that patronymic structure. Like, it seems like it probably could be a last name, but it also seems like his last name and patronymic are flipped. And then Sophie's full name is Sophie Stanislavskayevna Samarkov Smirnov, which follows the name patronymic last name naming convention, but her patronymic Stanislavskayevna would mean that her dad was named Stanislavskaya, which is an Eastern European woman's last name and not a name befitting of a noble lad. Her last name should also technically be feminized into Samarkova Smirnova, but sometimes that doesn't happen to Russian women's last name in translation, so whatever. But if I also had a cultural inaccuracy counter here, I would add this to that, because why is her dad named Stanislavskaya? That's not a name. Also, fun fact, Vlad is not the diminutive form of Vladimir in Russian, or Vladimir, as you may know that name. It's actually Volodya or Vova, but that sounds really weird if you try to say that with an American mouth. So after Sophie and Vlad have their spicy greeting, Team Anastasia enters the house, but poor little fart gets locked out. I guess they don't want farts in the house. Sophie quizzes them to make sure Anya is legit and tells them that, yeah, Anya seems legit and is a very convincing Anastasia, but The Dowager Empress is simply too upset for meeting so many Anastasia imposters that she will not meet with anyone else claiming to be Anastasia. But she will be at the opera tonight, if you catch my drift. So, in order to prepare for this opera meeting with Marie, they go on a shopping spree in Paris and have a night on the town. Yes, consumerism. I bet they don't have that in the Soviet Union. And there were actually frequent shortages of consumer goods there and a lot of deficits. So you had to stand in line for pretty much everything. And like when I talk to people who lived in the USSR, this is typically like their least favorite thing about it. Dmitri tries to talk to Marie at the opera about how he's got the real Anastasia, and she tells him that she knows all about his con man plan to find an Anastasia lookalike to take to Paris to scam her out of the 10 million rubles she promised for bringing her Anastasia. Anya gets so pissed off after hearing that she slaps him. This movie honestly really needed more Dmitri slaps, I'm not gonna lie. Then after the opera, Dmitri steals Marie's cab to force her to meet Anya. Marie meets Anya, sees that she's got the necklace she gave her, and recognizes that she's the real Anastasia. And there's a whole music box involved that gets unlocked by the necklace. It's very heartwarming, but not to zombie Rasputin, who is obviously pissed about this. And then we see Anya hanging out with Marie some more. Marie gives Anya a crown, even though, like, what is she the monarch of? Like, you don't have a country to be the monarch of. Just be normal, bro. And then Dmitri shows up and Marie offers him the money, but he's reformed now, so he's like, no, just seeing you happy is payment enough. He says hi to Anya, and a guard tells him to refer to the lady by her royal title, which again, where are you royalty? What country are you the monarch of? The one that doesn't exist anymore? Do you even have a royal title at that point? Like, I don't think so. Then Marie has a big party where she tells Anastasia that she's so happy to finally be reunited, but is worried that this isn't what Anastasia wants. Basically implying that Anastasia is in love with Dmitri and wants to be with him instead. Which, like, okay, so you're telling me that the woman who was born Princess Dagmar of Denmark and then married into Russian royalty in an arranged marriage, and who was raised knowing that she would be in an arranged marriage, and that her children and her children's children and so on would also be in arranged marriages to carry on the royal bloodline, is suggesting that Anya run off with a guy whose only known jobs so far have been kitchen worker and con man? Okay, I guess living in Paris has made her extremely open minded. At the party, Rasputin tries to use his magical demon powers to kill Anastasia. Dmitri attempts to save her and fails. And then Anastasia saves herself because she's a strong woman by breaking Rasputin's reliquary, which causes the evil demon inside of it to turn on zombie Rasputin and kill him. Anya says Das Vidanya as she finally slays Rasputin, showing that she is, in fact, Russian for the first time in this movie. And, like, only time. Anya and Dmitri then elope, and everyone lives happily ever after. Yay. And Bartok the bad cat's a girlfriend, so, like, I'm happy for him. He sounds weird as hell, but I'm happy for him. I mean, he's way better than Dmitri, let's be real. 7. Conclusion. If you made it this far, congrats! Now you know everything that's historically wrong with Anastasia, and some cultural inaccuracies too, as presented to you by an actual Russian person. American media never really portrays Russians or Russian culture or Russian history correctly or particularly well, so it's not surprising that Anastasia is like that too. I mean, whose history do they really convey correctly, though? But typically, Western media presents Russians as evil, untrustworthy bad guys with thick accents, or as some sort of vague European that barely registers as Russian, because in the West, and particularly in the US, the only good Russian is one that's completely divorced from their culture, or one whose Russianness is just a part of their tragic backstory. And you can even see this in Anastasia, in how the only mentions of Russia are either nostalgia about the Russian Empire, or people saying that they hate living in Russia and want to leave, like Dmitri, or that they hate the Soviet government, like Vlad on the train because his fake documents are fake. Anastasia, while entertaining, is not at all a Russian or a Soviet story in any capacity. In Anastasia, the Soviet Union is presented as something to be disdained and escaped, and the Russian Empire is something to feel nostalgic for. If you want good representation of Russian culture or a Russian or Soviet story, literally just watch a Soviet film. Like, watch The Irony of Fate or Stalker or Mimino or something for a real Soviet story. Those are all great movies. Anyway, if you had a good time and learned something cool, give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every other week now. Wow. I also have PayPal and coffee tip jars, link in the description box below if you want to tip me for my labor so I can buy a better microphone than this one day and continue making videos. Also, if you've been here since the beginning, you may have noticed that this was a remake of my first ever YouTube video. It was really ambitious of me to try to make this my first ever YouTube video, so now that I know more things about making videos, I really wanted to, like, try again and make it better, and, I think I succeeded. But anyway, I hope you spend the rest of the day thinking about history now. Or not, I don't know, do whatever you want. Okay, bye.